Experts predict by the year 2030, demand for forest products will double. The forest industry says it will not be able to meet these projected demands from their own lands, even if they utilize the most intensive management techniques available. It will be impossible to totally satisfy the overall need for forest products. Their land base is simply too small to supply as much wood fiber as we will all need. It is also obvious to many of us that the demand for forest land for recreation and development will also increase. A larger population and more leisure time will put more pressure on the non-timber values that forest land holds. Consequently, the privately owned woodlot will become a more valuable resource to the country and to you. Timber buyers will be seeking additional supplies of forest products. Developers and the population in general will be needing additional areas of forest land for conversion to shopping centers and housing developments. People with interests in the outdoors will be seeking additional areas to enjoy and use for their activities. Increasing market prices for timber and land will motivate many woodlot owners to manage their forests. In addition, we may face changing government policies that seek to regulate the woodlot. Professor David Field of the University of Maine at Orono is an expert on this subject.
The U.S. Forest Service has forecast quite a severe timber shortage in this country by the turn of the millennium, primarily for softwood timber. Fear of timber shortage has motivated and justified all of the programs that have come down through this century for growing more timber on parcels of small woodland. Society has a tremendous interest in the supply of timber. There's a question of jobs, there's a question of economic stability, and in particular, there's the question of timber price. Society has three basic options for dealing with a timber shortage. One is to pay more for forest products, another is to use less, and then a third, obviously, is to grow more. And we're not inclined to use less. Society would not be happy, consumers would not be happy about paying more, although higher prices would certainly be welcome to the small woodland owner. In fact, this is probably the most effective incentive available for producing more from small woodlands. But if growing more is society's goal, then there are three basic approaches to doing so. One is to grow more on public land, another is to have industry produce more, and a third is to somehow encourage the owners of small woodlands to produce more. Policies in place in this country now tend to discourage producing more from public lands. Industry owns only 14% of all the commercial timberland in the United States, simply does not have the capacity for great expansion. But the 58% of our commercial forest land that is owned in small parcels is said to have a great potential for producing more. If that is accepted, then society has three basic means for seeing to it that small producers do grow more. One is to appeal to them and to provide the kind of information and education that the Yankee Woodlot series is attempting to do. A second approach is to provide a direct incentive, either a tax break, property taxation break, or capital gains taxation, or a direct subsidy in providing planting stock or payments through the FIP and ACP programs and so on. The third approach is force, regulation. Forest practice is regulation, and I think this is something that the Yankee Woodlot owner might well be concerned about. I think in Maine, the chances for legislation aimed in this direction this decade is pretty strong. I think there's a good chance of it. And here it's important to understand that although society has every right to protect itself against the private exploitation of what we call common property resources, air, water, and so on, it has no inherent right to cheap timber. There would be a direct violation of the Fifth Amendment, the one that restricts society from taking private property without due compensation, if regulation were to be brought into being simply to produce more timber to keep the price of forest products low. So the hope of the small woodland owner in Maine should be that society, in trying to protect its interests, will recognize those that are truly public and those that are private as we look ahead.
What lies ahead for small woodlot owners in New England? Nationally, there is concern that the land cannot supply the volume of timber our country will need. Fortunately, our New England forest is well suited to the production of trees. It is a truly unique environment. The New England forest, as we know it, evolved nearly 2,500 years ago and has survived the combined effects of man and nature. And yet it still grows with untapped potential.
In fact, in some occasions, when I come this way, I try to peddle the notion that here in Maine one has the magic forest that continually renews itself. It's not like many other parts of the world where if you cut the trees down, you have to spend a lot of money planting new ones. Nature takes very good care of us here in this part of the world. That isn't to say that there aren't plenty of places that it's useful to plant trees. The most important thing about forests in Maine is that it rains and snows enough, there's plenty of water, and it's actually one of the better places on Earth to grow trees. It's impossible to keep the forest from growing. We've used it for centuries, and the uses should get better and better as we go along, especially as the people who own the land take a more and more serious interest in capturing the very real opportunities that they have. And as the demands for forest products from the large forest industries in Maine grow larger and larger, more and more is going to be sought from the smaller landowners. There are advantages in having the mixture of these small, highly accessible ownerships in proximity to the large industries, which can only partly depend on their own vast holdings. Granted that in the past, some of the opportunities, say in timber production, have not been as great as they might be. Now that most of the growth potential of the forest lands of Maine is spoken for, almost for the first time in history, more and more of it is going to be sought from these smaller holdings that are scattered around the more accessible parts of Maine. And if an owner does not consciously manage the land that he or she holds, there are important opportunities that are being overlooked.
Given the unique characteristics of the Yankee woodlot to reproduce and grow, what will the future opportunities for the owner be? What factors will affect or influence the management decisions that are being made now or several years from now? Although the future is never certain, it is possible to take some educated guesses. What follows is a collection of statements assembled from interviews conducted as we prepared Yankee Woodlot. Taken together, they should provide a glimpse of what's ahead.
Well, I think the future probably holds a number of changes. One, I think that over time we're going to see more mechanization in the forest. I think that it's quite possible we will see the utilization of additional species beyond the softwoods that we presently are using, particularly in our company, where at the moment we use just a very, very modest amount of hardwood, principally popple. So I think that if I could see a couple of things clearly, it would be additional mechanization and the possible use of more of popple.
Well, just about any new product that a company like ours would take on is going to depend really back to the original problem of quality in the wood. I would certainly advise small woodlot owners to make sure that whenever they harvest wood, that they take the time and the pains to high grade and separate out the wood according to its quality level. And this in turn will provide the necessary wood for companies like ours to get into new products because they know there will be a substantial and steady backing of this required high quality.
Well, I think probably the biggest impact that we're all going to see in all regions of the country is a regionalization of marketing. Now, no longer is Douglas fir or southern pine going to be able to make huge inroads into the Northeast. And so with a shortage of plywood, lumber, and even paper from the South and from the West, we are going to see a greater demand for this material to be grown or produced or milled locally. And so there's going to be a greater demand on the timber and the forest of the Northeast, and the prices are going to go up, as I said earlier, and this is going to encourage us to grow more logs, more pulpwood, more wafer board for export and for local markets. Wafer board is a good example. The reason that wafer board is coming into existence is because we no longer can economically ship plywood into the Northeast. And wafer board is competitive with plywood and is a good construction material. So I think this is the first generation of substitute products that are grown locally that are going to supplant what we've been getting from the outside.
Unfortunately, all preferential timber taxation schemes that have been tried this century have been Band-Aids on a very large wound represented by the property tax itself. The property tax is an extremely poor tax, but it is strongly linked to local government, and it may even be a necessary part of local government, and the feeling for that kind of government is so strong that it's probably next to impossible to move from the property tax to a more consistent and more broadly based tax. If you have your wealth in gold and I have mine in timber, in my judgment, my investment is doing much more for society than yours is. And if you sell your gold, you're taxed on the income. If I sell my timber, I'm taxed on the income. But you never receive a bill from the local assessor for your gold. Every year I receive one for my timber. It's a burden that all property owners live with. Woodland owners are no different. Fortunately, the tree growth tax law at least makes it a burden that's bearable.
Will good management allow the owner to pay that bill, pay the property tax bill?
Yes. If a person buys a piece of strip land, he's going to pay the same tax that he would if he bought a piece of fully stocked land, and that person is going to have to be prepared to pay more out in taxes than he can possibly earn on the land for many, many years. That should be reflected in the value of the land, in the price of the land. But if someone has a going forest, a small woodlot can be managed much like your backyard garden by comparison with a large industrial farm. You can manage it more intensively, you can pick away at the wood, and you can maintain a continuous flow of timber and value from a small parcel of land over a long period of time that simply can't be done on larger ownerships. So if a person plans well and manages well, there's no reason why he should not be able to cover his property tax and much more from his woodlot.
Congress, recognizing the unique aspect of timber proceeds, has established a special section of the code, section 631, sections 31A and B, in order to provide a capital gain treatment for the proceeds from their timber harvest. Congress did this because they recognized the fact that of a time bias against the timber owner as opposed to, let's say, a manufacturer or a farmer. And they said that this is in the nature of a capital asset which is sold only periodically at the very best, and maybe only once in a lifetime. Perhaps in the state of Maine, many people would sell a crop only once in a lifetime.
In the simplest case then, if a woodlot owner sells some timber and just writes in the number on his straight 1040, he's probably paying more taxes.
He's probably paying too much.
So in almost all cases, the capital gains would be an advantage to him.
Yeah, you'd have to assume that there was almost literally no other income at all except for a small amount of timber harvesting income to suggest that it would not be an attractive
so it's usually a great advantage.
It's usually a great advantage to them. Now, of course, it's a lot more difficult than that in actually done. Certain accounting procedures have to be correctly followed. The basis of the wood and the timberland owner has to be established so that it can be entered in the appropriate place on the return. Cost of sales have to be appropriately deducted. But the principle of the fact is that a timberland owner has the opportunity to use the capital gains treatment from the proceeds of his timber.
Let's talk now maybe about estate taxes. What are those kind of questions that
well, of course, the change in the capital gains tax was rather dramatic, but the change in the estate tax has been even more dramatic. And we really have given the timberland owner, for the first time, some relief of the terrific inflation that the value of his lands have been subject to over the past decade. As everyone is aware, even the smallest farmer, dairy farmer, for instance, with a woodlot, a potato farmer with a woodlot, has had a tremendous increase in the value of that land. Most people have not recognized that this has taken place. They just they haven't had to deal with it, they haven't been aware of it, and they just haven't realized how dramatically this has impacted the tax situation that would occur on their death without proper estate planning. What I think we should leave the viewer with is two facts. One is that there is a substantial value, a substantial asset value in his timberland, which he may not recognize, and he ought to find out. He ought to find it out. He ought to go to an adequate appraiser. He ought to go to a real estate agent. Anybody who can give him some real market information as to the value of, oh, you know, that 40 acres out back that,
sure,
that he's dismissed over the years.
Sure.
Then having this information in hand as to values, should consult with an estate planner, a trust officer in a bank, somebody who can guide him into an intelligent use of the provisions in the new tax law to minimize the impact of that tax on his estate, on his wife, on his or spouse, whichever way that it may be, and his family, and of course, I suspect, as far as we're concerned, the impact on the land.
Certainly.
That's the key point, is that these estate taxes were removing productive timberland from the asset base within the state and with the country. Harvests were being made prematurely, land was being sold for shopping developments, paved over, turned into housing, many other uses other than the productive use of the forest fiber for the national economy.
The reason that we have this bobcat is because it's probably the smallest fella buncher that you can use commercially day in and day out, that we feel you can get sufficient production with to warrant the investment. He's going through this stand, and this is an extremely thick hemlock stand, but the only reason that we're cutting this one is because it's similar in characteristic to a lot of spruce fir stands. And we're trying to take out the poorer quality plus some of the hardwood that's in here that's not of high quality, popple and soft maple, a little bit of gray birch. And we're taking that out and we're chipping that for fuel. And that's what makes the whole system work, is the fact that we're going to burn this rather than try to make a product out of it. And that way we don't have to segregate out the species. When you start to deal with small wood, one of the biggest problems that you run into is being able to get enough pounds or tons of wood to the chipper at one time. And when you start to cut with a chainsaw, it becomes very difficult to get this wood together. And so therefore you would have to choke it individually, and your production is so low that the economics of it don't work. But with a fellow buncher, you can gather up 2 or 3 smaller trees and cut at one time, and those you can put in a bunch with up to sometimes 30 or 40 other stems. so that when the skidder goes after it, he has a full payload even though it's small wood. The tonnage is there, so in one trip he brings the necessary material that you need to make the economics work. The ideal system is to have a grapple skidder, and we've tried several grapples, and in clear cuts or strip cuts it works exceptionally well. But in selective cuts, most grapple skidders, because of the weight and the size, we find we're sacrificing damage to the stand. So we take a small cable skidder and we adapt the cable hitch up, and we find that we can maneuver a lot easier. And once the fellow buncher operator and the skidder operator have worked together for a few weeks, they become a close-knit team, and it works fairly good. We realize it's not quite as fast as the grapple, but we think the end product, in fact, the stand improvement, is sufficient to warrant a little bit less production. The chipper that we have here with us on demonstration is a Treeland called a DL18 model. This one has about 300 horsepower. It has an 18-inch capacity, although a fairly skilled operator will get you an 18 or 19-inch in there by working at it a little bit. We average, in wood this size, we try to average about 5 to 6 trailer loads of chips of production a day. And the trailers average, depending on whether it's hardwood or softwood, they'll average from a low of probably 22 tons per trailer load upwards to 26 tons if it's strictly hardwood. We can normally fill a trailer in about between 45 minutes and an hour. It depends on the twitch distance, how many skidders you're using, how long the wood is, or how small the stems are. But we find that the system works well for us, and as I say, we're handling very small stems. Currently, we're in an experimental project with the S.D. Warren Company in Westbrook. They're in the process of building a large electric generator. They're taking this whole tree chips, they'll be burned, the high pressure steam will be made to use electricity, then the low pressure steam will be run into their paper mill for their paper machines and for their heat. And that's what we're involved in now, although we've had several inquiries from various operations throughout the state to make, in many cases, steam, but in some cases to make other products also. And so it looks like possibly we're on that this whole tree fuel market is on the near horizon, and in fact, that's what we're hoping for.
I expect that our woodlot of the future will be a far better managed woodlot than it is today. That is, if we're talking specifically about woodlots in which care is being applied now. I'll assume that that's the kind of woodlot we're talking about. In that case, if the proper work is done today, if the poor quality trees are being removed, perhaps for fuel wood or perhaps other uses, and the straighter, superior, better quality, best species are being maintained in the forest for future use, future growth, I think we will find that we're going to have in 20 years, we're going to have a forest that is far superior than the one today, but probably younger in many ways than the one that we have now. There'll be high quality, young trees that are producing good growth and high quality wood for future use.
How about the non-timber benefits from woodlots in the future?
I think this has a lot to do with the objectives of the individual landowners, but we know that there are many woodlot owners who are very concerned about the wildlife that are in their forest and also about recreational use of their woodlot areas. Those people will no doubt be paying attention to the preservation of den trees for the long use of animals in the forest. They'll be providing for edge effect along the forest with openings here and there in that woodlot so that those animals and birds that need the edge of the forest and to exist will be present. And we'll be providing trails for the use of recreationists through the forest. One of the problems we have with the management of the forest purely on a timber basis is that sometimes this leads to the exclusion of some of these other benefits. But some woodlot owners may want to do that, and that is their choice. If they want to raise that forest in the woodlot for the maximum production of timber
out of that forest, they can do it. But I think that many of them will not want that. They will want to have these other values as well.
I'm real excited about the future. An awful lot of people are very concerned about a projected shortfall in forest products, but I look at it as a challenge to foresters. I think those people who are managing their land for forest products over a long period of time, practicing good forestry now, are going to be in the driver's seat. They're going to have the merchantable products in the future. I'm very high on the future. People are predicting doom and gloom. They think we're not going to have wood products enough, and there could be a shortfall. But perhaps it's going to take a shortfall to bring the price of our product up to where it's really more attractive investment.
Now it's time for you to get involved. Taking an active role with your forest, managing it, is what Yankee Woodlot is all about. If you've watched the full series, you've seen nearly 5 hours of programming, but you've only begun to scratch the surface. If you have questions or run into problems with your woodlot, please consult with a professional forester. Their training and practical experience will help you find a solution. As you visit the woodlot, or if you live there, you will find that there is much more to learn and still more to do. Your work or recreation in the woods will help you learn more about the natural elements and understand the interrelationships of the timber, soil, animals, and water, and the influence humans have on them. I'm Bud Blumenstock. Thank you for sharing your time with us in the Yankee Woodlot.
Yankee Woodlot was produced by the Maine Public Broadcasting Network, which is solely responsible for its content, and was made possible in part by a grant from International Paper Company.